On Christmas Eve, while most people were sitting around warm tables with family, Claire discovered a pain even deeper than loneliness. She had been forgotten, even by her own family. That freezing night, when she decided to disappear into the emptiness of the town square, she had no idea that one unexpected encounter would set something in motion that would change her life forever. It all began when a tiny golden star rolled to her feet, along with the gaze of a stranger who seemed to see the hurt Claire had been hiding from the world. And now I want to know. Where are you listening to this story from? And of course, hit subscribe so you don't miss any new chapter of this emotional journey. Christmas Eve in Golden Creek had always been magical. Always. Ever since she was a little girl, when Claire Monroe would run barefoot along the cracked sidewalks and brick streets of the small town, that night had a special taste, a taste that mixed hot chocolate, cinnamon, hope, and the feeling that, for a few hours, the world became better. Kinder. Truer. But that night, as Claire walked alone down Main Street, wrapped in the red coat she had inherited from her mother years earlier, the magic seemed to have vanished. Or at least, it had vanished for her. She was 28. Brown hair falling gently over her shoulders, eyes that used to be bright but now carried a deep sadness, and a way of walking that revealed the weight she carried, not on her back, but in her soul. Her body moved through the town like a ghost, physically there, but gone in every other way. The red coat, although old and frayed at the edges, was the only thing that still connected her to who she had been. Every time she put it on, she felt her mother's presence, that woman who sang while she cooked, who hugged too tightly, and who had died 5 years earlier, leaving behind an emptiness no one had been able to fill. As Claire walked along Golden Creek's Main Street, she watched the decorated houses. Each one was a small world of light and warmth. Candles flickering in windows. Handmade wreaths on doors. Nativity scenes in front yards, little clay figures glowing under soft yellow bulbs. And in every one of those houses, there were families. Families laughing, talking, getting ready for Christmas dinner. Families with overflowing tables, green bean casserole, honey-baked ham, mashed potatoes, pies cooling on counters, red wine, sparkling cider. Families hugging, exchanging gifts, sharing that sacred moment that Christmas is supposed to be. But Claire had no family. At least, not tonight. Or better, she did have a family. She had just chosen to stay away. Or maybe, she had been chosen to stay away. The truth was complicated, the way the truth almost always is. It had all begun months earlier, with an argument that seemed simple on the surface, but turned out to run far too deep to be fixed with a quick "I'm sorry." Her older sister, Maria, had always been the perfect daughter, the one who did what everyone expected, who married young, had kids, and took care of the family home with almost religious dedication. And Claire, well, Claire had always been the difficult one. The one who questioned everything. The one who dreamed too big. The one who never quite fit into the shape her family wanted to press her into. The argument started over an inheritance. When their mother died, she left a small amount of money for each daughter, nothing life-changing, but enough to matter. Maria wanted Claire to use that money for something practical, a down payment on a place, a safe business, a real life. But Claire had other plans. She wanted to study. She wanted to travel. She wanted to figure out who she was before chaining herself to responsibilities she'd never asked for. And that's when the words started flying. Maria called Claire selfish. Said she didn't think about the family. That she wasted opportunities. That she was irresponsible. Claire shot back that Maria was controlling. That she lived through other people. That she never let anyone breathe. That their mother would have wanted her to be happy, not trapped. Their father tried to step in, but ended up taking Maria's side, like he almost always did. The stepmother stood there in awkward silence, hands clenched, eyes stuck on the floor. And when it was all over, there were only slammed doors, tears, and a silence that stretched on for months. Claire had tried to make things right. She showed up at the family's front door in September, holding a homemade cake, her eyes swollen from crying. Maria opened the door, but didn't let her in. They talked out on the porch, while Maria's mother-in-law, Claire's stepmother, watched from the hallway, uncomfortable and unsure where to stand. "It's not that simple, Claire," Maria said, voice cold. "You can't just run around doing whatever you want, hurting people, and then show up with a cake and expect everything to go back to normal." "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," Claire replied, her voice shaking. "I was just trying to be honest about how I feel." "Honest?" Maria snapped. "You called my life a waste. You said my kids were a burden. How do you think that felt?" Claire tried to explain. Tried to say that wasn't what she meant, that the words had come out wrong, that she'd been frustrated and hurting. But Maria didn't want to hear it. She closed the door softly, and somehow, that softness cut deeper than if she'd slammed it. And from that day on, nothing changed. Months went by. Claire tried calling a few times, but no one picked up. She sent messages that got cold, generic responses. She showed up again in October, but this time Maria didn't even open the door, just left a note taped to the glass saying it wasn't a good time. And now it was Christmas. And Claire was alone. She kept walking down Main Street, past the glowing houses, the bursts of laughter spilling out of windows, the smells of food warming the cold night air. Each step was a reminder of everything she had lost. Not because she'd done something unforgivable, but because she had been honest. And honesty, sometimes, is the highest price we ever pay. When she reached the town square in Golden Creek, Claire stopped. The square was the heart of the town. It was where people gathered, where events happened, where the magic of Christmas always felt strongest. And that night, the square was being prepared for the big community Christmas celebration, an event Claire knew by heart, one she'd gone to every year as a child and teenager. The Christmas tree was enormous. At least 25 feet tall, wrapped in strands of golden lights blinking in a soft, hypnotic rhythm. Red, blue, and silver ornaments hung from its branches, reflecting the lights so that the whole tree seemed to glow from the inside out. At the very top, a large metal star caught the light and tossed it back toward the sky, like it was trying to talk to the real stars above. Around the tree, white-painted wooden benches had been wrapped with red ribbons. A small bandstand stood to one side, where Claire knew the children's choir would sing later. Folding tables were being set up for the food, cinnamon rolls, cornbread, cookies, hot cider. Volunteers rushed back and forth, fixing decorations, testing microphones, stringing more lights. And there was life. So much life. Kids ran between boxes of decorations, laughing and chasing each other with the kind of innocence only childhood has. Couples strolled hand in hand, watching the preparations with quiet smiles. Whole families pitched in, carrying trays, hanging bows, passing out extension cords, talking and laughing as if the night itself were something sacred. And Claire watched all of it from the outside. Like always. She walked slowly toward the tree, keeping a careful distance from the volunteers. She didn't want to bother anyone. Didn't want to look like she was intruding. She just wanted to be near that light, that magic, even if it was only as an observer. She drew in a deep breath. The cold air filled her lungs, carrying the smell of cinnamon, hot chocolate, and that indescribable scent that only appears at Christmas. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to connect to that long-ago feeling, the feeling that somewhere in the universe, magic still existed. But when she opened her eyes again, all she saw was her own loneliness, reflected back at her in the tree's lights. That was when something unexpected happened. A tall man with broad shoulders and dark hair falling softly across his forehead was chasing after a large box that threatened to slip from his hands. He wore a dark green sweater that matched his eyes perfectly, eyes that, even from a distance, transmitted a sense of calm and safety. When the box almost escaped his grip, he caught it just in time and laughed at himself for nearly dropping it. And in that exact moment, a small golden star, a delicate ornament made of metallic paper, came loose from the box and began rolling slowly across the pavement toward Claire. She saw it coming. The star rolled gently, as if it had all the time in the world. And Claire, moved by an instinct she didn't fully understand, bent down and caught it carefully. The star was light, almost as if it were made of air. When Claire held it in the palm of her hand, she felt something strange, like this tiny object carried a meaning that went far beyond its physical form. That was when the man reached her. He was breathing a little hard, but his smile was so genuine, so warm, that it seemed to light up everything around him. There was something about him that transmitted a peace Claire hadn't felt in a long time, as if he carried with him the certainty that everything, somehow, would turn out okay. "That little star has a mind of its own," he said, still catching his breath. "It's always trying to escape. This time it almost made it." Claire smiled despite herself. "I think it was tired of being stuck in the box," she replied, with a lightness that surprised even her. "It wanted to see the world." The man laughed, a genuine laugh that echoed across the entire square. "You're right. I think every star deserves that chance," he said, extending his hand to take the ornament. "I'm Matthew Brennan, by the way. I help organize this festival every year." "And you? I don't think I've seen you around before." Claire handed him the star carefully. "I'm Claire. Claire Monroe," she answered. "And yes, I'm from here. I was born and raised in Golden Creek." Matthew tilted his head slightly, observing her with an attention that bordered on uncomfortable, not because it was invasive, but because it seemed genuinely authentic. Like he was really trying to see her, not just look at her. "I see," he said, softening his smile. "Sometimes you grow up in a place and still feel like a visitor. Like you never really belonged." Those words pierced through Claire like a silent arrow. How did he know? How was it possible that a stranger could see so deep inside her? It's exactly like that," Claire murmured, turning her gaze toward the tree. Matthew didn't push for more questions. He simply stood beside her, looking at the tree as well. There was something very comfortable about that silence, not the heavy silence Claire knew so well, but a lighter one, respectful, that seemed to say, "I'm here, if you need me." "Would you like to help?" he asked finally. "We're in the final stages of decorating and we could always use an extra pair of hands. Besides..." He paused, smiling. "Anyone who can catch a runaway star with that much grace must have a talent for this kind of thing." Claire thought about saying no. She thought about continuing to wander alone through the town, like she'd been doing for days. She thought about going back to her small rented apartment on the outskirts, where there was no Christmas tree, no special food, nothing that even remotely resembled a home. But then she looked at Matthew's face, that honest smile, those eyes that seemed genuinely interested in her answer, and felt something inside her whisper, "Stay." "I can help, yes," she answered, with a voice more steady than she expected. Matthew's smile widened. "Perfect. Come with me. Nobody works alone here." As they walked toward the bandstand, Matthew introduced Claire to the other volunteers. There was Mrs. Rosa, an older woman with white hair and a warm smile who immediately offered her hot coffee. There was Jack, a young guy who worked at City Hall. There was the Sullivan family, who'd been helping with the festival for over a decade. Kids ran between all of them, laughing, filling the space with simple, pure joy. And, to Claire's surprise, everyone welcomed her as if she'd been part of the group for years. Nobody asked why she was alone. Nobody made comments about her solitude. They simply included her. Naturally. As if it were obvious that she belonged there. Matthew placed a large red bow in Claire's hands. "Can you decorate that column?" he asked. "It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfect is boring. It just has to be beautiful." Claire got to work, carefully adjusting the bow, trying to make it symmetrical. As she worked, she talked with Mrs. Rosa, who told her stories about past Christmases in the town. Stories about people who had met in that same square, about families who had reconciled, about moments that changed lives. "Christmas has a funny way of opening doors," Mrs. Rosa was saying, helping her adjust the bow. "Doors we didn't even know existed. Doors to the past, to the future, and to the heart." Claire listened and tried not to think about Maria. Tried not to think about her mother. Tried not to think about everything she had lost. But it was hard. Especially when the background music changed and Silent Night began to play. That was the song her mother used to sing. That was the song that defined Christmas for Claire, not just because it was beautiful, but because it carried with it an entire lifetime of memories. Memories of a mother who was no longer here. Memories of a family that no longer existed the way it used to. Memories of a time when Claire believed things would last forever. She felt her eyes fill with tears. She tried to hide it, pretending to focus on the bow. But her body wouldn't cooperate. Her chest tightened. Her breathing grew heavy. The tears threatened to spill over. That was when Matthew approached again. He didn't say anything. He just stood beside her, watching the bow she was tying. And somehow, that silent presence was more comforting than any pretty words could have been. "That song gets to me too," he said finally, still watching the column. "My mom used to sing it while she cooked. Now, every time I hear it, it's like she's right here." Claire turned to look at him. "Is she still alive?" she asked. "She is," Matthew replied. "But I see her less and less. She lives in another city now, with my brother. And I stayed here, working, trying to make a difference. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing." There was such honest vulnerability in those words that it touched Claire deeply. "You are," she assured him. "Look around. You're making a difference. You're saving people." Matthew looked at her. "You really think so?" "I'm sure of it," Claire answered. And it was true. Because, in that moment, as Claire looked at Matthew, this man she'd known for only a few hours, she realized he was saving her too. Not with grand speeches or dramatic gestures. Just by being present. Just by including her. Just by making her feel like maybe, just maybe, she still deserved to belong somewhere. The night kept moving forward and the square transformed gradually. The lights grew brighter as the sky darkened. The music continued playing. More volunteers arrived. The tables filled up. Every decoration found its place. And Claire, who just hours earlier had been walking alone with no direction, was now surrounded by people, working, laughing, sharing this moment. And, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. When they finally turned on all the lights and the square became completely illuminated, there was a brief moment of silence. All the volunteers stopped to admire what they'd created. It was beautiful. It was magical. It was exactly what Christmas should be. And Claire, looking at that glowing square, felt something shift inside her. It wasn't complete happiness, there was still pain, still resentment, still loneliness, but it was close. It was hope. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, life still had some surprises left. Matthew approached with 2 cups of hot chocolate in his hands. "For you," he said, offering her one. Claire took it and breathed in the sweet aroma, letting the warmth travel up through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For including me. For being here." Matthew smiled. "You deserved to be here from the beginning, Claire. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us of that." And in that precise moment, as Claire sipped her hot chocolate slowly and watched the lit-up square beside a man she was only beginning to know, she felt that something fundamental had shifted. Something inside her had awakened. And that night, which had begun with loneliness and pain, was turning into something completely different. The community festival hadn't officially started yet. But for Claire, it already had. And everything was changing. The night moved slowly over Golden Creek, and the square seemed to take on a life of its own as the last details of the community festival were wrapped up. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed against the pavement, mixing with the glow of colored lights reflected on the ground, still slightly damp from the evening dew. Kids ran between benches and boxes of decorations, carrying ornaments like they were ancient treasures, while adults fiddled with microphones and cables, laughing at their own clumsy sound checks in that carefree way that only Christmas seems to allow. Claire watched it all with a strange kind of distance, even while her hands were busy and her body was part of the movement. It was as if she were walking into a world she used to know, but no longer recognized as hers, like coming home after a long time and realizing the furniture had been moved while she was gone. Every smile she received from the volunteers felt like it was trying to mend some crack inside her, some wound she had been dragging around for months. But those wounds had been there so long, had sunk so deep, that she still didn't know if she could trust the idea of being welcomed again. Matthew kept moving around the square, always in motion, always watching, always with that impossible mix of responsibility and lightheartedness. His easy way of talking to people, the way his eyes lit up when he listened, the natural smile that showed up without effort, everything about him radiated a kind of safety Claire hadn't felt in years. Not even in her own house, back before the arguments, before the endless silences, before everything fell apart. Working beside Mrs. Rosa, who talked about the festival with the enthusiasm of someone who had lived this night dozens of times, Claire listened as the older woman shared stories that sounded like they'd been pulled straight out of a family scrapbook. "This festival saves this town every year, darling," Mrs. Rosa said, carefully wrapping a string of lights around a post, her hands trembling just a little with age. "There are people who go through so much pain, so much fighting, so much loneliness, but they come here, see all this light, all this togetherness, and something inside them softens. It's like Christmas is whispering, 'You're not alone. You never were.'" Claire smiled politely, but the words went straight through her. "I honestly didn't know it meant this much," she answered, watching the lights sparkle between Mrs. Rosa's fingers. "Oh, sweet girl," Mrs. Rosa sighed, pausing for a moment to look directly at her, her eyes holding the quiet wisdom of a long life. "Christmas has a way of touching the places that hurt, and the places that heal. This time of year shows us roads that were always there, we just couldn't see them. Roads back home. Roads back to ourselves." The sentence sounded simple. But it hit Claire harder than she expected. The places that hurt and the places that heal. It clung to her chest like a truth she had always known but never put into words. Because in a way that frightened her, it felt like that was exactly what this night was doing to her, pressing on the old wounds and, at the same time, waking something tender and hopeful she thought she'd lost. While she tied a red bow around one of the bandstand columns, a small job, but one that required patience and careful fingers, Claire glanced back at the tree. The lights pulsed in a soft rhythm, like a slow, steady breath. Like the heartbeat of someone sleeping peacefully. She felt a sharp little ache in her chest, not exactly pain, but memory. Remembrance. Nostalgia. She remembered her sister Maria, always turning Christmas decorating into a competition, racing Claire to see who could hang more ornaments faster when they were kids. She remembered how serious Maria took it, how badly she wanted to win, and how they both ended up laughing when they saw the tree leaning under the weight of crooked ornaments. She remembered their dad, pretending to be annoyed with the chaos, but pausing afterward to stare at the finished tree, eyes shining, trying not to let anyone notice. She remembered a version of her family that now felt very far away, like it belonged to a different life, to a different Claire, the Claire who believed things and people would stay forever. Her eyes burned. She blinked a few times, trying to push it all back. She didn't want to cry there, in front of everyone. She didn't want to be the person who brought sadness into a night like this. She didn't want anyone to look at her and see broken. But the body doesn't always listen. Her throat tightened. Her chest felt heavy. Her vision blurred at the edges. That was when Matthew came back toward her, wiping his hands on his jeans in a distracted, natural gesture. "How's it going?" he asked, studying the decorated column with real attention. "You're actually really good at this. It looks way better than if I'd done it. I always make everything too straight, too perfect. You gave it soul." Claire let out a small, surprised laugh. She wasn't used to people seeing anything good in what she did. "I think I just got lucky," she said, trying to disguise how emotional she felt. "Luck, huh?" he said, leaning his head to get a better angle, like he was admiring a painting. "No. You've got a touch. I saw it from the moment you caught that star. Some people just grab things. You take care of them." She looked away quickly, trying to hide the sudden warmth spreading across her cheeks, that uncomfortable heat that rose whenever someone truly saw her. "Thank you. I haven't heard anything like that in a long time," she murmured, barely above a whisper. But he heard it. Matthew watched her for a few seconds. Not with pity. Claire hated pity. Not with that surprised, patronizing admiration. But with a quiet kind of respect, like he understood more than she was saying out loud. Like he could read between the lines of her story. "Sometimes, Claire," he said, his voice both steady and gentle, "the way people speak when they know what they're saying is true, the world around us is so loud we forget what our own voice even sounds like. And then we start to believe we're not good enough. That we don't deserve things. That we should be different. But that's nonsense. You're incredibly capable. You're just hurt. And hurt is not the same thing as broken." Claire felt her chest tighten in a way that was almost painful. He spoke so naturally about things she herself was afraid to face, that it felt almost too intimate, and yet, strangely comforting. Like someone had finally given a name to the heavy, messy thing she'd been carrying inside for months. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "You talk like you've known me for years," she muttered, eyes fixed on the pavement, watching the lights reflect in small puddles. "I don't have to know someone for years to see when they're carrying the world by themselves," he replied, with a softness that felt almost too precise. "Eyes give everything away. They're like windows, you know? And yours have been asking for help for a long time." Claire looked down, feeling her heart pounding faster than it should. She felt heat crawl up the back of her neck. And for the first time that night, she realized she didn't want to run from that conversation. She didn't want to put her walls back up. She didn't want to pretend. She didn't want to be the girl who kept her distance from everyone and everything. But before she could say a single word, before she could untangle even one of the thoughts crashing around inside her, the microphone on the bandstand screeched loudly, making everyone jump. Someone's voice echoed through the square, announcing that the children's choir would be performing their last song before the official start of the celebration. It was time for everyone to gather around. Time for the magic to begin. Music swelled again. People drifted toward the bandstand. The whole mood of the square shifted, warmer, sweeter, more familiar, like the air itself had thickened with nostalgia. In the middle of it all, Matthew turned to her and lifted his chin toward the bandstand. "Wanna watch?" he asked. He didn't push. He didn't grab her hand. He just offered. A small gesture, full of everything that had passed between them in the last few minutes. Claire hesitated for only a second. Then she nodded. The children's choir was made up of about 20 kids, all wearing red t-shirts and slightly crooked Santa hats that kept slipping over their ears as they moved. They sang off-key, enthusiastically, arms too stiff or too wild, with that combination of shyness and bravery that only kids seem to have. Some clung to each other's hands, eyes wide as they searched for their parents in the crowd. Others grinned confidently at the audience, as if this were the biggest moment of their lives. Claire watched them with a nostalgia so deep it almost hurt. She could almost smell the cornbread her mom used to bake on Christmas Eve while she and Maria decorated the tree. She could almost hear her mom's voice humming along with songs on the radio. She could almost feel that old, childlike certainty that the people you love will always be there. The next song started. Silent Night. And something inside Claire gave way. It didn't explode. It didn't shatter loudly. It cracked quietly, from the inside. She raised a hand to her chest, as if she could hold everything in place with just her fingers. The memories rushed in all at once, her mother in the kitchen, rocking gently to the rhythm while she stirred batter, that imperfect but warm voice singing over the sound of clinking dishes, arms that hugged a little too tight, as if afraid to ever let go. Her mother wasn't here anymore. And Claire had wasted months that could have been spent with her family, trapped in a fight that, from this distance, suddenly seemed so small. So pointless. Matthew noticed immediately. Not because it was obvious, Claire was doing everything she could to hold herself together. But because he was really paying attention. Because he really cared. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, taking a small step closer, his voice low and careful, like someone approaching the edge of a cliff. Claire tried to answer, but her voice came out thin and cracked. "It's just, a lot at once," she managed, her eyes glassy, trying to blink her tears back before they fell. Matthew didn't push. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer cheap advice. He didn't try to patch her up with words. He just stayed. At her side. In silence. Present. And somehow, that presence, simple and wordless, was more comforting than anything else could have been. When the song ended, applause rolled through the square. Claire took a deep breath, like someone trying to rearrange puzzle pieces that no longer seemed to fit the way they used to. "Thank you for this," she said quietly, her voice still a little rough. "For not asking too many questions. Sometimes that's all we need. Someone who stays without demanding explanations. Someone who just gets it." Matthew smiled, and this time the smile held a shadow, like he knew more about that feeling than he'd ever admit in one conversation. "We can always choose," he said softly, "to be someone's weight, or someone's support. I've always wanted to be the support." And it was in that exact moment, that fragile instant when Claire finally felt herself leaning, just a little, into trust again, that something completely unexpected happened. A sharp ringtone cut through the music playing in the background. It wasn't another carol. It wasn't kids laughing. It wasn't the buzz of the festival. It was a cell phone. Matthew's. He answered with an easy hello, at first, but his expression changed almost instantly. It was like watching a light go out from the inside. Like watching someone who'd found a moment of peace suddenly be grabbed by something heavy and cold. He straightened too fast, his body reacting before his mind had fully caught up. "Yeah. I'm here." "What happened?" he asked, his tone tightening. Claire watched the calm drain from his features. "Matthew," she asked carefully, taking a small step toward him. "What's wrong?" He inhaled sharply, eyes blinking too fast, as if trying to process too much at once. "It's my mom, Claire," he said, his voice unsteady. "She just got taken to the hospital. She collapsed. She was home alone, the neighbor found her on the floor. I have to go. I have to get there. Now." The world around them seemed to fade. The square, the lights, the music, for a moment, everything blurred into the background. Claire's heartbeat spiked. It wasn't her mother. It wasn't her emergency. But something in the way he said "my mom," that urgency, that heartbreak, that barely contained terror, hit her right in the place where her own grief still lived. Because she knew that fear. The fear of being too far away from someone you love when they need you most. The fear of realizing you should have been there, should have done something different, should have said more, sooner. Is there anything I can do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, almost pleading. Matthew shook his head quickly, panic starting to break through his composure. "I don't want to drag you into this. You've already helped so much tonight. I'll call a cab. I'll figure it out. I'll—" But before he could finish, something in Claire, some quiet, stubborn part of her that knew all too well what regret felt like, reached out. She placed her hand on his forearm, more firmly than she intended. "You're not going alone," she said, with a certainty that surprised even her. "I'm going with you. Right now. No arguing." Matthew stared at her, torn between not wanting to burden her and desperately not wanting to face this by himself. But when he met her eyes, saw the sincerity there, the kind that doesn't come from politeness, but from the deepest kind of empathy, his shoulders dropped ever so slightly. "Thank you, Claire," he said, his voice breaking for the first time that night. "Really. I don't know what I'd do without someone right now." And so, while the square stayed bright and full of life, while kids kept laughing and families kept hugging, Claire and Matthew slipped away quietly, pulled onto a road neither of them had planned to take. A road that would change Christmas. A road that would change everything. The Golden Creek General Hospital wasn't big. It was a 3-story building from the late 80s, with that tired off-white paint that somehow always looked a little dirty, no matter how recently it had been redone. The fluorescent lights in the hallways cast a harsh, cold glow, the exact opposite of the warm, golden lights of the square they'd just left behind. There was no magic here. Just the blunt reality of life, bodies that fail, people who wait, fear that settles into the air like dust. Matthew rushed through the sliding doors, Claire close on his heels, both of them wrapped in that electric urgency that only bad news brings. The woman at the front desk, mid-40s, worn expression, tired eyes, barely glanced up as she pointed them toward the elevators, as if she'd seen this scene play out 1,000 times. On the 3rd floor, a nurse told them Mrs. Brennan, his mom, Mary Brennan, was being examined. She fainted at home, the nurse explained. Her neighbor found her and called an ambulance. Her blood pressure dropped pretty low, but she's awake now. We're still running tests, but she's stable. The word stable landed like a small, fragile blessing. Not enough to erase the fear, but enough to keep it from swallowing him whole. Matthew let out a long breath he didn't know he was holding and sank into one of the plastic chairs lining the hallway. Claire sat down beside him, leaving just enough space that he could breathe, but close enough that he knew she was there. It felt like hours before they were finally allowed into the room. When they stepped inside, Claire saw a woman whose eyes were the same shape and color as Matthew's, that same gentle calm, but now clouded with worry and exhaustion. Mary lay in the hospital bed, a thin blanket pulled up to her waist, and 4 taped to the back of her hand, the monitor beside her humming and beeping softly. Matthew went straight to her, taking her hand carefully, like he was afraid she might break if he held on too tightly. "Mom," he murmured, his voice thinning at the edges. "You scared me." Mary gave him a small, tired smile. "I'm fine, honey," she answered quietly. "It was just a little scare. My pressure dropped, that's all. The doctors say it's stress and not taking good enough care of myself. Nothing major." But there was something in her eyes, that quiet fear people have when they realize their body isn't what it used to be. The uneasiness of someone who's been reminded, too clearly, that they're not invincible. Claire hovered by the doorway, not wanting to intrude on a moment that clearly belonged to them. But Mary noticed her almost immediately. "And who's this?" Mary asked, her voice gaining a spark of curiosity. Matthew turned, as if remembering suddenly that Claire was there. "This is Claire," he said. "She was helping out at the Christmas festival tonight. I got your call and she insisted on coming with me. She wouldn't let me come alone." Mary studied Claire with that particular kind of gaze that only mothers seem to have, the one that looks past clothes and posture and tries to read the heart. "Come here, sweetheart," Mary said, gesturing toward the empty chair on the other side of the bed. "Sit down." Claire walked over slowly and took a seat where Mary had pointed. Up close, she could see the lines of age around Mary's eyes, the fatigue in her face, but also a kind of strength that felt familiar in a way she couldn't quite explain. "Thank you for bringing my son," Mary said, reaching over and taking Claire's hand in hers with surprising firmness. "He doesn't like to ask for help. He's always been that way. Tries to carry everything on his own." Claire glanced at Matthew, who looked both embarrassed and guilty. "He deserved to have someone here," Claire replied softly. "No one should go through this alone." Mary's smile widened, a little more genuine this time. "You're right," she said. "And you look like someone who isn't used to asking for help either." The words hit closer than Claire expected. How could this woman, who had met her all of 30 seconds ago, see right through her like that? Claire started, but the rest of the sentence withered on her tongue. "It's okay," Mary said gently, squeezing her hand. "Sometimes we all need someone who won't take no for an answer. Someone who shows up and says, 'You're not alone.' Not tonight." Something inside Claire cracked at that, not in a way that broke her, but in a way that felt strangely necessary. Time in the hospital moved differently. The clock on the wall said only minutes had passed, but it felt like years were being lived inside that hallway, in the rhythm of footsteps, the soft closing of doors, the hushed voices of doctors. More tests were ordered. More nurses walked in and out. A doctor explained that Mary's collapse had likely been caused by a sharp drop in blood pressure, combined with exhaustion and stress. They were going to keep her overnight for observation. Eventually, Mary drifted off to sleep. Matthew and Claire slipped back out into the hallway and sank into 2 neighboring plastic chairs, the kind that always felt too hard and too cold, as if they'd been designed to remind you that you weren't meant to stay long. "Thank you," Matthew said after a while, breaking the silence. His voice was raw around the edges. "Really? I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." Claire looked at him. "You would have done what you always do," she said gently. "You would have carried everything by yourself." He let out a humorless little laugh. "Yeah," he admitted. "Probably." His gaze drifted toward the far end of the hallway, unfocused. "My dad died when I was 16, he said quietly. Heart attack. Fast. There wasn't anything anyone could do. After that. I made this stupid promise to myself that I'd never let anyone I loved go through something like that alone again. That I'd always be strong enough to handle everything. Take care of everyone. Fix things. He shook his head a little. But you can't fix everything. You can't stop people from getting sick. You can't stop them from hurting. Sometimes all you can do is sit in a chair like this and watch monitors beep. Claire rested her hands in her lap and stared at them for a moment before answering. Sometimes, she said slowly, loving someone doesn't mean fixing everything. It just means being there. Sitting in the chair. Holding their hand. Not letting them be scared alone. Matthew turned his head and looked at her. You're here, he said softly. You didn't have to be, but you're here. I am, Claire replied. And I'm not going anywhere. And in that moment, in that too bright hallway that smelled like antiseptic and old fears, Claire realized she'd made a decision, one that had as much to do with herself as it did with him. She was tired of leaving people alone. Tired of leaving herself alone. The hours bled into each other. At some point, Matthew's older brother, Rick, arrived, hair messy, jacket thrown on over a t-shirt, eyes already tired from a long drive. He and Matthew hugged in that clumsy, wordless way siblings sometimes do when they're too scared to say everything out loud. Eventually, Rick went home to rest, promising to come back in the morning. Matthew refused to leave. Claire didn't leave either. They took turns sitting closest to Mary's bed in the small ICU room where they'd moved her, just to be safe. Machines glowed and blinked softly, measuring things Claire didn't totally understand, but felt grateful for anyway. When the first hints of sunrise began to touch the border of the sky outside the narrow window, Matthew finally spoke again, his eyes still fixed on his mother. You know what the strangest part is? He asked quietly. I've spent most of my life trying to be too strong. Trying not to need anyone. Trying not to lean on anybody so I wouldn't be a problem. He swallowed. And then, the one night I finally let someone help me, it feels like everything I've been holding up on my own is crumbling. Like all the weight I've been carrying is suddenly visible. Claire didn't answer right away. She watched Mary breathe, watched the slow rise and fall of her chest, the steady line on the monitor. When my mom died, Claire said at last, I thought the only way to survive was to toughen up. To not ask for anything. To not expect anything from anyone, so I wouldn't be disappointed. I thought needing people was weakness. She glanced at him. But you know what? Being alone didn't make me stronger. It just made me lonelier. Matthew let her words settle for a moment. My dad's heart gave out in one night, he said. And I think, somewhere in my head, I decided I'd never let that happen to anyone else. I'd see everything coming. I'd be prepared. I'd prevent it. He exhaled, the breath shaky. But you can't. You can't control everything. You can't stop every bad thing. You can just love people. And sometimes, even that doesn't feel like enough. Claire turned fully toward him now and, without overthinking it, reached over and took his hand. Sometimes loving them is exactly what's enough, she said. Because it means they weren't alone. It means that if something happens, they knew they mattered. Matthew's fingers tightened around hers. You're still here, he whispered, as if saying it out loud made it more real. After everything I dumped onto your night, you're still here. I told you I'm not going anywhere, Claire said. Not tonight. And she meant it. By the time the sun had fully climbed into the sky and pushed the last bits of night out of the corners of the room, Mary stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light and the unfamiliar ceiling. When she turned her head and saw Matthew sitting there, hair messy, eyes red from a sleepless night, her whole face softened. You stayed all night, she asked, her voice rough but warm. Of course I did, he replied, leaning in and taking her hand again. Where else would I be? Mary's gaze shifted past him, landing on Claire, who stood just behind his shoulder. "And you?" she asked. "You stayed too?" Claire nodded. "I didn't want him to be here alone," she answered truthfully. Mary smiled, that knowing, motherly smile that always seemed to carry both gratitude and mischief. "You're a good girl," she said. "My son, well, he deserves someone like that." Matthew flushed. "Mom," he started, but Mary just gave a small laugh and closed her eyes for a moment, breathing a little easier now. "You two need to get out of here for a while," she said, reopening her eyes. "Go live a little. Go breathe some fresh air." "I'm not going anywhere. The doctors and nurses have me on a tighter schedule than any of you ever could." Matthew hesitated. "Mom, I don't want to leave you by yourself." "You're not leaving me by myself," Mary interrupted, her tone gentle but firm. "I'm surrounded by medical staff. I'm in good hands. I need rest. And what I really want, is for you to not lose your life sitting in a chair staring at a heart monitor. Go. Be happy. Don't waste time being afraid of what might happen." Claire watched Matthew absorb his mother's words and, in that second, she understood something he'd needed to hear for a very long time, that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own life on the altar of fear. That being present isn't the same as being trapped. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is live fully, and let the people who love you see you doing it. They left the hospital later that morning. Outside, the world seemed almost unfairly bright. The sky over Golden Creek was clear and blue, the air crisp but not cruel, the town already moving at its usual quietly busy pace. People were out getting last-minute groceries, carrying wrapped boxes, holding coffee cups as they hurried down the sidewalk. Matthew and Claire walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. "Claire," Matthew said eventually, his voice calm but intentional, "you know you could call them, right? Your family. You could try again." Claire stopped walking. The idea alone made her stomach twist. The house. The silence. The door closing gently in her face. The unanswered calls. The texts that felt like talking to a stranger. "You really think they'd want to hear from me?" she asked. "I don't know," Matthew said honestly. "I can't promise you how they'll react. But I do know you'll regret it if you don't at least try. Life's too short to let one fight erase everything. The people we love can disappear, just like that." He snapped his fingers gently. "Don't wait for a hospital call to decide what really matters." Claire's heart began to pound. The thought of being rejected again scared her. But the thought of never trying again, of letting that door stay closed forever just because she was afraid to knock, that scared her more. "Will you come with me?" she asked quietly. Matthew didn't hesitate. "Anywhere you want to go," he replied. They walked back to his car, and Claire sat in the passenger seat staring at her phone, the contact labeled Dad sitting at the top of her call list like it had been waiting this whole time. Her fingers shook slightly as she tapped it. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. She almost hung up. Then she heard his voice. "Hello?" her father said. Claire's throat tightened. "Hi, Dad," she managed. It's me." There was a long pause. Static hummed faintly in the background. "Claire," he said at last, the word coming out half like a statement, half like a question. "Hi. I was wondering if we could talk." "All of us," she said, her voice trembling now. "You, me, Maria, everyone. I'd like to try again." Another silence. Longer this time. She could hear the clink of a plate in the background. Footsteps. A door closing somewhere. At last, he spoke. "Claire," he said, exhaling slowly. "Your sister is here." She's been wanting to talk to you for weeks. She just didn't know how to start. The tears came before she could stop them. Really? She asked. Really, he answered. We all made mistakes. We let things go too far. We want you home. If you're willing. Matthew watched her out of the corner of his eye as she cried in quiet, stunned relief. Not the devastating kind of crying from before, but something closer to release. To possibility. Christmas Eve, the night that had started with nothing but loneliness and pain, had just shifted into something else entirely. A second chance. A way back. The Monroe family house looked exactly the way Claire remembered it. The same white siding with pale blue trim. The same wooden front door that always creaked a little when it opened. The same small front yard where she and Maria used to play until they were called back in for dinner. It was as if time had wrapped itself gently around the house and refused to move on until Claire came back. Matthew parked a little way down the street, giving her a few extra steps to gather herself. You sure? He asked quietly, that familiar softness in his voice. No, Claire answered honestly. But I need to do this anyway. He reached over and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. I'm right here, he said. No matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. That was enough. Claire stepped out of the car and walked up the front path she knew by heart. Each step seemed to echo with old memories, laughter, slammed doors, whispered secrets, Christmas music playing too loud. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door opened. Her father stood there. He looked older. There were more lines around his eyes, more gray at his temples, a heaviness in his shoulders she didn't remember being so pronounced. For a few seconds, they just stared at each other, both studying the changes, both trying to reconcile the person in front of them with the person they'd been missing. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He opened his arms. And that was all it took. Claire stepped forward and fell into his embrace. He squeezed her tightly, like he was afraid she might vanish if he let go too soon. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. For everything. For not listening. For taking sides. For letting all this go on for so long. I'm sorry too, Claire choked out. I should have been more careful with my words. I should have tried harder to understand. I shouldn't have let it get this far. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Come in, he said softly. Your sister's here. And we all want to talk. If you're ready. I am, Claire said. And she was. When Claire stepped into the living room, she saw Maria standing there. Her older sister looked different, a little more tired, a little more human, a little less like the impossible standard Claire had always measured herself against. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying recently. Or often. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Maria crossed the room in a rush and threw her arms around Claire. I'm so sorry, Maria whispered, already crying. I was so harsh. I didn't listen. I was cruel. I let my fear turn into control and I pushed you away. I should have been better than that. You're my sister. And I said terrible things too, Claire replied, hugging her back just as tightly. I called your life a waste. I said things about your kids I never meant. I was angry and I wanted to hurt you. And I did. I am so sorry. Maria shook her head through her tears. I've missed you every single day, she said. Especially tonight. Me too, Claire whispered. More than you know. Their stepmother approached then, a little hesitant, unsure of how much space she was allowed to take in that moment. Hi, Claire, she said softly. Welcome home. Claire turned and hugged her too. Thank you, she answered. And she meant it. In that living room, the same room where angry words had echoed months before, something new was beginning. The same walls. The same furniture. But the air felt different. Lighter. Softer. Like everyone inside had decided, consciously or not, to put their weapons down. Matthew stayed outside on the front porch, giving them time and space. He sat on the top step, elbows on his knees, watching the sky shift into warmer colors as the sun dropped lower. The house buzzed quietly behind him, muffled voices, snippets of laughter, the sound of a chair being pulled back, a cupboard opening. After what felt like hours, the front door opened again. Claire stepped out and sat down beside him. "How was it?" he asked. She exhaled slowly, like someone finally setting down a weight they'd been carrying for way too long. "It was perfect," she said. "We talked. We cried. We apologized. We remembered why we love each other. They want me to stay. For Christmas. All of us together." Matthew smiled. "That's amazing," he said. "I'm really happy for you." "They also want you to come," Claire added, turning to him. "If you want to. If your mom's doing well enough." They said, "You're welcome here." His eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. "They want me there?" "I want you there," Claire said, her voice steady now. "Because you're important to me. You helped me find my way back here. You reminded me I still deserve a place. I don't want you to be somewhere else while I finally come home." Matthew didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, really looked at her, like he was memorizing the way she sounded when she said "you're important to me." Then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't complicated. It was simple and honest and full of every small moment they'd shared that night, the star, the lights, the hospital, the hallway, the phone call. When they finally pulled back, both of them were smiling. Christmas Eve dinner that night felt different from every other one Claire could remember. Not because the food was better, although everything tasted almost unbelievably good. Not because the decorations were prettier, though the house glowed with soft lights, candles flickering on the table, garland twined around the banister. What made it different was the peace. The simple, quiet peace of being surrounded by people you love and knowing, deep down, that they love you back. The peace of knowing you've been forgiven. And that you've forgiven, too. Claire sat at the table and let herself really look around. Her dad, telling some half-remembered story from when the girls were small, pausing to wipe at his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Maria, laughing with her husband and kids, reaching across sometimes just to squeeze Claire's hand under the table. Their stepmother, moving in and out of the kitchen, setting dishes down with the practiced care of someone who has learned, over time, how to quietly hold a family together. And Matthew, sitting between Claire and her dad, talking easily, answering questions, fitting in like he'd always belonged there. At one point, while everyone was still eating, Maria reached for Claire's hand and lowered her voice so only she could hear. "I really am sorry," she said again. "I should have understood that you're not me. You have different dreams. That doesn't make them wrong." Claire squeezed her hand back. "And I should have respected your choices more," she replied. "I was so afraid of turning into you that I turned my fear into cruelty. You were doing your best. I see that now." "We were both hurting," Maria said. "And hurt people. But we don't have to stay that way." "No," Claire agreed. "We don't." Maria glanced over at Matthew, who was deep into a conversation about football with their dad. "You met someone," Maria observed quietly. "Is he good to you?" Claire followed her eyes and watched him for a moment, the relaxed shoulders, the easy smile, the way he glanced at her every now and then like he just needed to check she was still there. "He is," Claire said simply. "He's really good." After dinner, Once the kids had gone off to play and the adults had migrated to the living room, Claire's dad cleared his throat and asked everyone to settle. "There's something I'd like to say," he began, nervousness and emotion tangling in his voice. "This Christmas almost didn't happen. We almost let a stupid fight destroy everything we'd built together. We almost lost our daughter, not because she was gone, but because we pushed her away." He turned to Claire. "But she came back. And she brought someone very special with her." Everyone's eyes slid over to Matthew, who shifted a little in his seat, suddenly very aware of being the center of attention. "Matthew," her dad continued, "you don't know us that well yet. But you were there for Claire when we weren't. You saw her when she felt invisible. You stood by her when she believed she didn't deserve anything. That matters. So, if you'd like, you're part of this family now. As far as I'm concerned." Matthew swallowed hard, his eyes shining a bit more than before. "Thank you," he said quietly. That means more than I can say." Then Claire's dad picked up a small, wrapped package from the coffee table and turned back to her. "And this," he said, voice trembling, "is from your mother." Claire's breath caught. "With everything that happened," he continued, I'd forgotten she left this with me. She told me to give it to you on the Christmas you needed it most. I think, tonight is that night." He handed her the box. Claire's fingers shook as she peeled the paper away. Inside, there was an old, worn leather journal. She opened it carefully. The first thing she recognized was her mother's handwriting, looping, familiar, full of life. They weren't diary entries. They were letters. Pages and pages of letters written to Claire, to be read on hard days. Letters about love, about courage, about how to stand back up when the world knocks you down. About how to keep your heart open when it would be easier to shut it tight. On the very first page, there was a message. "My dear Claire. If you're reading this, it means you're going through a hard moment. It means you feel alone, lost, maybe even like you don't deserve to be here. So let me tell you something that is absolutely, undeniably true, you do. You deserve to be here. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be happy. Life is too short to waste on fear. Too short to waste on fights that don't matter. Too short not to tell the people you love how much they mean to you. So if you're holding this in your hands, I want you to do something for me. I want you to forgive. Forgive others. But more importantly, forgive yourself. Because you are worthy of love. You always have been. With all my love. Mom." The words blurred as tears filled Claire's eyes. She didn't try to stop them. She cried, for the girl she'd been, for the time she'd lost, for the fights that had kept her away, and for this impossible, beautiful moment in which her mother's voice had somehow reached across years and found her exactly when she needed it most. Matthew wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her into him. Her dad placed a hand on her back. Maria leaned in from the other side. It turned into a cluster of arms and shoulders and quiet sobbing and soft laughter, grief and relief braided together. For the first time in a long time, Claire's heart felt full. Not perfect. Not painless. But full. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house had gone quiet, Claire and Matthew stepped out onto the front porch. The sky above Golden Creek was clear, full of crisp winter stars. The street was mostly silent, just the distant hum of a car now and then and the soft crunch of frost under their feet. "You know this night changed everything for me too, right?" Matthew said, leaning against the railing. Claire turned to him. "How so?" she asked. "I've spent my whole life trying to be the strong one," he said. "The one who never needs too much. The one who's always fine, always capable, always in control. Letting you be here with me at the hospital, letting myself lean on you, it felt terrifying. But it also felt right. He looked at her, a small, honest smile tugging at his lips. You showed me that needing someone isn't a weakness. That asking for help doesn't make me less. That sharing the weight might actually be what I've been missing. Claire reached for his hand. And you showed me that I'm not a burden, she said. That I don't ruin everything I touch. That I'm allowed to show up with all my mess and still deserve a place at the table. They stood there for a moment, hands intertwined, breaths mingling in the cold air. Claire, Matthew said softly, I don't know exactly what the future looks like. But I do know I don't want it without you in it. I want to be here. With you. For real. Not just for one magical night that we both pretend never happened. There was no grand speech, no perfectly rehearsed lines. Just the quiet truth of a man who'd finally stopped running from his own heart. Will you be my girlfriend? He asked. Claire laughed through the tears she didn't even realize had formed again, not from pain this time, but from something much closer to joy. Yes, she said, without any hesitation. Yes. I want that. I want us. He grinned, relief and happiness washing over his features, and kissed her again under the cold December sky. In the years that followed, life didn't turn into some flawless fairy tale. There were bills and arguments, long days, and small disappointments, but there was also something else woven through it all. Consistency. Kindness. Presence. Claire went back to school, finally pursuing the path she'd been too afraid to claim for herself. Her family, the same family that once told her she was being irresponsible, cheered her on from the sidelines this time, asking about her classes, bragging to friends. Matthew found a better balance between taking care of others and letting them take care of him. He visited his mom more often. He let his brother step up. He stopped trying to anticipate every disaster and focused more on actually living the quiet, ordinary days in between. They got married about a year later. It wasn't a giant wedding. It was small, intimate, right there in the town square in Golden Creek, under the same towering Christmas tree where a runaway golden star had once rolled to Claire's feet. The lights twinkled overhead as they said their vows. Their family sat on folding chairs. There was a chill in the air and warmth in every face watching them. Mary was there, healthy and glowing with gratitude. Maria stood by Claire's side as her maid of honor. Claire's dad tried, and failed, not to cry as he walked her down the short aisle. When they said I do, there was no doubt in either of their voices. They weren't promising a perfect life. Just one where they would stay, especially on the hard nights. Several Christmases later, on a quiet snowy evening, Claire stood in the kitchen of the home she now shared with Matthew, stirring a pot of hot chocolate on the stove. The house smelled like cinnamon and sugar cookies. Music played softly from a speaker in the living room, not loud carols like the ones from her childhood, but something softer, nostalgic. Matthew walked past, carrying a tray of fruit, pausing to kiss her cheek on his way through. On the floor, near the tree, a little girl sat playing with wooden blocks. Her name was Sophie. She had Claire's warm smile and Matthew's steady eyes. Sophie had come into their lives in a way that felt almost like that first golden star, unexpected, luminous, rolling right into their path. A gift they hadn't dared to plan but had longed for just the same. A knock on the door pulled Claire out of her thoughts. Maria arrived with her family, arms full of gifts and desserts, cheeks pink from the cold. Not long after, Claire's dad and stepmother came in, laughing about the weather, shaking off snow from their coats. Mary followed, holding a homemade pie and scolding Matthew for trying to take it from her like she wasn't perfectly capable. Soon, the house was full. Full of voices and overlapping conversations. Full of old stories retold and new ones beginning. Full of clinking glasses, little feet running, and someone laughing from another room. Claire stood back for a moment and just watched. She saw her sister, her father, her stepmother, her mother-in-law, her husband, her daughter. She saw a life built piece by piece, choice by choice, moment by moment. A life that had almost been derailed by pride and hurt, and yet had been set back on track by something as small and stubborn as the decision not to give up. She could still remember, with a clarity that stunned her, that other Christmas Eve, the one where she walked the streets of Golden Creek alone, convinced she had been forgotten even by her own family. If someone had shown her this scene back then, this kitchen, this tree, this group of people gathered around a table, she wouldn't have believed it. But here it was. Real. Lived. Hers. Matthew came up beside her and slipped his fingers between hers. "You okay?" he asked, smiling gently. She nodded. "Yeah," she said. "I was just thinking about that night." He didn't have to ask which night. He knew. "The one where a certain golden star almost escaped," he teased. "The one where my whole life changed," she corrected, still smiling. "I thought that night was the worst gift life had ever given me. But, it turns out, it was the beginning of everything." He lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles. "Sometimes," he said, "the night that hurts the most is the one that opens the door." Claire looked at him, at the man who had stood beside her in hospital corridors and under Christmas lights, through arguments and quiet mornings, through fear and forgiveness, and knew completely, undeniably, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not just in a house. Not just in a town. In a life. In a family. In a love that had seen every sharp edge she had and stayed anyway. Her home. At last, and for real, Claire had come home. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. If this Christmas Eve touched your heart, if Claire's journey from loneliness to love, from distance to reconciliation, left something warm inside you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And tell me in the comments. Which moment moved you the most? Was it the reunion with her family, the gift from her mother, or that quiet moment when Claire finally allowed herself to be loved? I'll be reading your answers with a lot of care. See you in the next story.